live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Blog Talk Radio.
And good morning. Good morning and welcome to Side Spot.
Morning and welcome to
Want to get some of this echo out that I was having in the background. But again, good morning and welcome. The weather's changing. It's becoming a spring-like atmosphere. See little sprouts coming up in the ground, and I'm looking at all the work that's ahead of me. But it keeps me occupied. It keeps me busy, and I enjoy working in the yard because it's also a time to be at peace. Even though you have the traffic going by, you're listening to all the music, the variety of music, I'll say, that takes place during the course of the day with all of the vehicles traveling back and forth. It's still peaceful because you can kind of escape. And if you're anything like me, I enjoy discovery. So I come across little snakes, frogs, different kinds of insects. There are a variety of birds that also come and seemingly gravitate towards this one particular tree we have in the yard. Get a lot of cardinals, blue jays, and some other birds that I can't describe because I'm really not a bird watcher, but I enjoy watching birds, and there's a difference. Bird watchers can pretty much tell you whether the bird is male or female, and they can tell you some of the mating things that they do. And me just watching birds, I just watch them for behavior reasons. I watch their nature, and a lot of times we can watch others, be it a bird, be it a squirrel, be it our pets, or be it our partners, and we can look at them and we can assess and evaluate them and their character. But we can't really do the same for ourselves. And many of us, if we're asked the question about our self-concept, many people will speak about their character in almost a third-party kind of term, and don't even realize it. In the last session, I talked about the id, the ego, and the superego, and how we tend to use this term egotistical, and even though you can go in the dictionary and find the definition of egotistical, it really isn't a psychological, psychiatric definition, especially not according to Freud. The id is that which seeks everything, wants everything. It's totally self-centered. It's always seeking to please. It always wants pleasure. It always wants to feel good. It always wants whatever it wants. Ego has the responsibility of managing the id. So the ego actually protects the individual from itself. It has its own protective mechanism. If the id is seeking pleasure out of something that is not only harmful to itself, but harmful to others, the ego has a responsibility of kicking in and saying, hey, hold up, this is not good. The superego is where all the morality comes in. The morality, which again is something that is developed within one's own being, based on events, based on lineage, and a whole host of other things, which really have little to do with the individual, but a lot to do with the individual. Because it's a matter of what you can control and what you cannot control. It's a matter of what you're aware of and what you are not aware of. And there's a lot of things that we're not aware of about ourselves that we profess to be aware of, but when faced with certain situations, we really see how much we know about ourselves. We just think it's autopilot. We just think that whatever took place and however we responded to it or reacted to it is appropriate, even when it's inappropriate, because the first thing we do with our behaviors when we act out is justify it. And even after it's brought to our attention, clearly pointed out that our behavior was not appropriate, we will look at other factors and blame the other factors for why it happened, but not blame the other factors for why you just did it. So it means you're aware to some capacity that certain events took place in your life that caused you to react to similar circumstances the same way. Maybe not as intense, maybe as intense as when the incident happened. But a lot of times people will say, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't do that. And it happens all the time. In relationships. And relationships are really tough. They're really tough. They're great to be in to some capacity, but they're tough. They really are. Because it requires a lot of daily self-assessment and evaluation of oneself. And I said self-assessment of self in every situation, good, bad, or indifferent, because we tend to look at the things that cause us difficulty. We won't address the things that make us feel good. We won't ask ourselves, why do I enjoy this so much? Why do I enjoy being with her so much? Why do I enjoy being with him so much? Why do I enjoy chocolate ice cream so much? Why do I enjoy the park, outdoors? Why don't we ask ourselves those things? That's the id. That's the id. The id is seeking to make us feel good, and the id will not look at the things that cause us harm, will not look at the things that cause us difficulties, won't look at those things at all. That's the responsibility of the ego and the superego. That's their responsibility. But the conditioning that is responsible for the development of those areas seeks environmental, external attention. So the human being has to connect with things outside of itself in order for it to develop in a capacity of true being. And I say it in the sense of saying that if you put an infant in an empty room, and I always use this analogy, if you put an infant in an empty room, all white walls, no windows, it will develop. It will develop based on a natural order of physical development. That means that at a certain age a child should be walking, talking, sitting up, crawling, those kind of things, being able to push itself up, being able to get off its back. A child will do those things naturally without any help from the parents. But when it comes to the psychological development, when it comes to socialization, the child needs to be able to connect with things outside of itself. When we talk about the self concept from a psychological perspective, one of the things we have to look at is the existential self. And when we talk about the existential self, this is the part where the child realizes they exist as a separate entity from others, and that they continue to exist over time and space. A child will, at the infancy stage, we walk all around the child, talk all around the child. The child has to cry in order to get attention. The id tells the child to cry because the child is hungry. The child needs to be picked up. The id tells the child to do that. That's what the id tells the child to do. But why does the id tell the child to do that? The id tells the child to do that because the child has had that experience already. The experience the child has had is that when it cries, it's picked up and or fed. What does that do for the id? It satisfies the id. Now I feel good. You put an end to my crying. You put food in my mouth. So there are some senses about the human being that are being satisfied, but again, it's dictated by the id. The id tells the person to do that. It's what the id tells the person to do. Now, over time, because the child knows that it is not a part of this environment, it exists independent of the environment just to many capacities. Why? Because of how we treat the child, how we interact with the child, how we engage the child. At a young age, when a child cannot walk, we put them in playpens, we put them in bassinets, we put them in objects that are separate from everybody else. They don't sit on a chair with us. They don't, sometimes if you're holding them they do, but we don't put them in a chair and they sit back in a lounge chair. We don't sit them in a rocking chair and they sit back and rock in a chair. So they begin to have an experience. They're having an experience. They see these things going on. Now, they don't know any pleasure about it because they haven't experienced that. What they do know is that if they begin to cry while you're sitting where you are, you get up. So now they've learned a couple of things. They've learned how to make you do what they want you to do. Even as an infant. Even as an infant, I am now telling you what to do. What happens when you don't get up? The baby, the child just continues to cry. Eventually it gets on your nerves and eventually you do something. You see where I'm going with this? The id is making the child realize what it can and cannot do. How to please itself despite any others. It doesn't have the concept yet of being self-centered. It's automatically self-centered in that stage. It's automatically self-centered. It automatically thinks that the world evolves around it, knows it exists in the world, but sees the significance of separateness. I'm not with the rest of this. Everybody walks around me. I see all these people grouping up, and every now and then somebody comes over and says a few words to me. But you see where the attention, oh, that person comes to me whenever they come to me. This person doesn't come to me that often. Why don't they come to me that often? Well, let me cry and see if they do come to me. Again, psychological, sociological development. The child begins to see how they do connect with the rest of the world, but still see themselves as the center of the world. That's what children do. And over time, even though the stages of the child's physical development permits it to be even more actively engaged in its surrounding environment, it still sees itself as independent of it. Why? Because everything else around the child is growing. If there are other siblings, they're growing taller. The child is getting taller, but everything seems to still be above it. The parents may be at the stage that they're no longer growing, but there are different things happening with the parent. Either the aging process, or either some work that one is doing on itself, which makes it begin to engage the child differently. But the child still sees itself as separate, therefore remains self-centered. So, when we start talking about the concept of self, now we have to begin to look at how is the child seeing themselves in the center of this universe, this world around them. How are they seeing themselves? Are they confident? You hear people say if a child is crying, let him cry. He'll stop eventually. Why did the child stop? Did he stop because throat got sore? Just couldn't yell anymore? Gave his own self a headache? Why did the child stop? And where's the rationale in that thinking? Because if you've gotten to a stage now where you've made the change in your thinking toward how you're going to help this child further develop, the child can't read your mind. The child knows nothing about any of these changes. Now the child begins to see the world differently. Still separate, but now what is this new concept that it has taken on of the world, and what has it done to its own concept of self? This used to work for me when I cried. I used to get picked up. I used to get fed. Now I'm crying and I'm not getting fed anymore. Now I'm crying and I'm not getting picked up anymore. Now they're coming over to me and they're just handing me things, and that I don't want that, and we wonder why the child throws it down, because that's not what you've been doing. You haven't been just handing me a bag of potato chips, or handing me a popsicle, or handing me, a bowl of dry cereal. You haven't been doing that. You used to pick me up. What part of the game is this? So the child now learns to dismiss things, throws it on the floor, because that's not what you've been doing for me. But we chastise the child for doing that, but the child doesn't know why we've changed, because of the level of engagement and interaction that we're having. Different key words that are used to demonstrate to a child that the child is growing, that, oh, you're becoming a big boy now, you're a big girl now. Daddy's little helper, mommy's little helper. That's great. That's wonderful. Affirmations. And they keep seeking that. Because why? You've conditioned the child to understand good, great, big, little. There's some dialogue happening there, but the explanation as to why the change of things is happening is not attached to our change in thinking about how we want our child to develop. Therefore, it's a lot of confusion, just as is with the statement I just made. But you have to rewind and play it again to hear what it is that I said, because it's confusing for all involved. For all involved. So we're talking about the existential self. Now we're talking about the categorical self. And the categorical self pretty much speaks to concrete in thinking. Defining my gender. Girl. Boy. Male. Female. 5-year-old. 2-year-old. 8-year-old. 12-year-old. This is the categorical self. Now I'm seeing myself as a being who is now a 3-year-old boy. I'm a 3-year-old boy. What does that mean? Well, if you treat all your children the same, as so many parents say, that means that the way you treat my sister is the way you're going to treat me, and I'm a boy, but I see a difference in how you treat the girl than you do me, the boy. Because I watch you. Now, mommy loves you, daddy loves you, but why do you let her, the girl, get away with doing these kinds of things? Or why is it when she cries, or this happens to her, you pick her up and hold her? But when the same exact thing happens to me, you yell and scream at me and don't embrace me in the same manner. I'm developing now a concept of self. I know now that I'm different, but I'm trying to understand why. And you're going to be able to explain to me why girls are treated differently than boys. You're going to tell me that. I'm sure you're going to come up with that. Somebody can tell me why a boy, if he falls, scrapes up his knee, he's a little boy, he has blood running down his leg, and you're telling him to shut up. Stop acting like a sissy. And some other names, and I choose not to use, but the same thing doesn't happen with the girl. The same thing doesn't happen with the girl. And I'm sure that there's somebody who can, rationalize the concept of why boys and girls are treated differently. Well, if you can do that, then you have to ask yourself the question, if you know that boys and girls are raised differently, are groomed differently, then why do you have such difficulty in your relationships? It's just a question. You don't have to answer it. You don't have to answer it. But wouldn't it solve the mystery, or one of the many mysteries, of why we have so many difficulties in relationships? That's one aspect of learning. So you have to go back and not only look at how you were raised, but you also have to ask the question of the individual of interest, the attended person. You have to ask them how they were raised as a child. Those are important questions to ask. They're important questions to ask, because what we tend to do is we tend to become judgmental of the individual who sits before us, but this person is a product of its environment, and not just its environment, because they came up in a housing project, they came up in low-income, environments, they came up in the so-called ghetto, because we've allowed that term to be used as far as ghetto, but I've seen a lot of strong families come up out of the ghetto. So if strong families are coming out of the ghetto, then why do I want to move to the east side with Wheezy? Moving on up to the east side, deluxe apartment. Because the reality of it is, togetherness is togetherness. Unity is unity. Disunity is disunity. And when we look at the dysfunctional families that exist, they all ain't coming from the hood. Having money doesn't make a better child. It just creates better opportunities because you have money. So let's get that down first, because when we talk about psychiatry, when we talk about psychology, when we talk about human development and self-concept, self-awareness, those kind of things, we're still talking about another human being's contribution to another human being's, but it started with the first that passed it on to the next generationally. So what you have, what you're giving, you've gotten from somewhere, and they've gotten from somewhere, and so on and so forth. So I am my lineage. I am walking history in many ways, because that which resides within me presents itself in a variety of ways and is imposed upon everybody I come into contact with. Everybody. Everything about me is imposed upon others. But most importantly, it's imposed upon my children. It's imposed upon my spouse. It's imposed upon people in a capacity that we fail to look at. Because again, many of us still locked into self-centeredness do not see ourselves as part of the rest of the world, but see ourselves as the center of it and want to be catered to. Want to be catered to in that same manner. In that same manner. When what we're supposed to begin to do as we age, as we mature, we're supposed to realize that we are not the center of the earth, that everybody around us is just as important as we are, not more important, but just as important as we are, because they have a right to live, they have a right to be who they are, and we have to come to understand. It's better to understand than it is to be understood. It's so much easier when you understand the fact that these people are just like you, they're flawed. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to commit errors. It's how you internalize their errors that you have to take a look at. Because if you're thinking homicidally because a person just cut you off on the highway, there's something wrong with that thinking. Let's get it right now. There's something wrong with that thinking. There's something wrong with that thinking when you think that you should curse somebody out just because they failed to do something in the way that you think they should have done it. They did it their way. You have issue with it, but it's your issue, but you make it their issue because they should act according to how you want them to act. So that's not being egotistical, that's egotistical. That's you trying to satisfy yourself in spite of the fact that there's somebody else. So your ego is not even in control. Your ego is not even in control. You're totally out of control. You're totally out of control. So you know that you're a male. You know that you're a female. You know that you're age. You know these concrete things about yourself. You know you have short hair, long hair. You know all those things. And all these things that you begin to know about yourself, you begin to make the comparison to others. Because the id, again, wants you to be pleased, to be satisfied. So if you have short hair and your id unmanaged looks at people with long hair differently, then you have a problem. Because now you are developing, because you're evaluating others now. Because that's what self-concept is. The self-concept is how we think about and evaluate ourselves. Think about it. The self-concept is how we think about and evaluate ourselves. The term self-concept is a general term used to refer to how someone thinks about or perceives themselves. It is an important term for both social psychology and humanism. Social psychology and humanism. Because based on your perspective of your humanity, based on that superego which dictates the moral contribution, the moral perspectives of life, based on those things, based on your ego and its ability to manage the id, will definitely make you take a look at how you interact with other people. We haven't even touched the surface today. Like many of us haven't even touched the surface of our condition. Of our condition. I can tell you one thing about me. Every day I'm looking at myself. Before, during, and after the day, the incident, the interaction. We have to learn how to do that. Next week, we're going to move on and we're going to talk more about the categorical self, and then we're going to start talking more about self-image. What you see in yourself. Again, thank you so much for joining me at Side Spot. I hope you enjoy your day. Be safe. Peace.